Your top story, 3 pharmaceutical giants are under scrutiny for alleged price fixing of cancer drugs. The Competition Commission announced the probe in Pretoria yesterday. The Commission will investigate oncology medicine provider Roche Products, which includes its US-based biotechnology company Genentech Incorporated. Pfizer and Aspen Pharmacare are also suspected of excessive pricing of cancer medications in South Africa. The Commission plans to obtain evidence from patients and key stakeholders. Meanwhile, Pfizer denies allegations that the company supplies the lung cancer product at 152,000 rand. The company further says they respect the process initiated by the Commission and that Pfizer will fully cooperate with the authorities. My colleague Stefanie Jansen van Vuren finds out how pharmaceutical companies in South Africa are charging exorbitant prices for cancer drugs.
Pharmaceutical companies are allegedly charging exorbitant prices for cancer drugs locally. Let's take a look at some of those prices. A 250 milligram dose of Xalkori crizotinib will set you back 152,000 rand. Well, the next thing is we can look at the cancer drug Herceptin. Can cost up to 550,000 rand for a 12-month treatment. Aspen is being probed in Europe and in South Africa for allegedly price hikes of up to 4,000%. Well, now let's take a look at the key claims from the Competition Commission. Take a look at the first one, reasonable grounds to suspect wrongdoing in pricing of cancer drugs. The second one is that the Roche Holdings probe for excessive pricing of breast cancer medicine. Roche is suspected of trying to stop a generic entrance to breast cancer drugs. A 12-month course of breast cancer medicine can cost R500,000. And the Commission has evidence Roche charges higher prices for breast cancer drugs to private sectors. Pfizer is also being probed for excessive pricing of lung cancer medicines. Aspen is under investigation by the European Commission for allegedly excessive pricing of cancer drugs. The Competition Commission has been allegedly threatened to stop selling cancer drugs in Spain unless they agree to a 4,000% price hike.
You know, absolutely, it's a sad day that we have to reach the stage in South Africa where we need a Competition Commission to lodge an inquiry into the cost of cancer medicines, where there are so many people who are dependent on these life-saving drugs. For them now to hear that the medicines have been artificially increased in price and that there is something somewhere that isn't kosher. You know, when you hear the words, "you have cancer," spoken to you by a doctor, many people experience this as the worst day of their lives. It is so emotional for them, and the impact psychologically on them is severe. And then to learn that you will most probably not be able to afford the medicine that you need to save your life. I think it's difficult for any of us to put ourselves in that position.
It's has got a long history. You will remember that in the past, there was a breast cancer drug called Herceptin, which was turned down by medical aids. The problem of the cost of drugs in this country it's a big problem. If medical aids cannot afford to pay for drugs that treat cancer, how about the state? If the medical aids cannot afford to pay for that, it would mean that the health care in this country is in the hands of conglomerates which control the prices of drugs. This also reminds me of the time when HIV drugs were very expensive. If people remember correctly, it used to cost about 4,000 rand per person per month to treat HIV, which meant if you have a couple, you were spending 8,000 rand per month, and that's what not people were earning. Even as we speak today, people are talking about 3,500 minimum wage. So, Matapelo, I think the problem that I have is that if this is not going to be challenged, South Africa can as well forget about treatment of certain conditions.
There needs to be a collective understanding from government of what these products actually cost. Now, I am aware that government does a fair amount of these benchmarking discussions and conferences, etc. But the real cost is quite simple. If government were to be willing to go to the actual manufacturers, because a large volume of these drugs and medication are not manufactured by the brands themselves, and without mentioning groups, most of the larger groups use custom manufacturers in various countries who manufacture and then label these drugs for them. You can then, as an entity or as government, go to them and say, what are the actual costs and what can we import them for? I'm acutely aware that the margins of a lot of these products, including cancer medication, have margins of 80 to 90%. They are expensive, no doubt, for industry players to bring them in. But it does not justify then an exclusivity for a phenomenal margin, which a lot of the players, which again, and I say it with great respect to my colleagues, in the healthcare space, that actively participate in maintaining higher price margins because of exclusivity and import processes.
In context between the role players, that is, advocacy organizations, as they're doing now, the pharmaceutical industry, as is happening now, and government in terms of making sure that South Africans aren't being taken advantage of. It's, in some respects, regulations that have got us to this point. The single exit pricing and the benchmarking in terms of how much these people were allowed to charge for this product is regulated. So that really hasn't helped us up to now there. If you're talking about being able to access cheaper medications earlier, one of that processes involves patent protection. That's also regulation. So on one hand, regulation helps you, and on the other hand, regulation hinders you. So I think unless you get all the players around the table and get to an amicable solution, which most importantly gets care to the women that need it, I think until that process becomes tantamount and profit and profitability and also making money from the whole process on all fronts, and that includes medical insurers, until that process is better managed, you're never going to get a solution that benefits individual patients.
Well, ANN7 gauged people's reactions to the drug probe. Take a look.
I think it's exorbitant prices. I mean, we pay exorbitant amounts for medical aids and that, and we still have to pay for, medication. And medical aids pay some of it, but a lot is not paid through the medical aid, and it actually sucks.
I am pleading to our government and pharmaceutical industries to be considerate to poor people like us, to reduce high prices of medication. We don't earn much, and people our age are constantly ill.
Medication is very expensive, and if it's possible, I mean, it'll be like really good if the prices would come down, because most of us can't afford it.